Caron and Digby. That's
Hi.
great to see you. Hi.
Can I
Very nice to
say
meet you.
Yeah.
John?
Yes.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Amazing to be in Cape Town, and you fixed nice weather for the visit. Couldn't be better.
I think you brought it. We didn't make it.
Dad, this was very lucky weather.
We are super impressed by the weather and also the town.
I'm glad to hear it.
And then we're hearing that you have an event going on today. There's a double inauguration.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about what's going on today.
So we are sitting now in the Institute of Infectious Disease and Molecular Medicine at University of Cape Town. And over the past few years, there was awareness that we were running out of space. And so 2 new buildings were constructed, in some ways unfortunately coinciding with the COVID pandemic, but in other ways it meant that some of the building could proceed while there wasn't a demand for place on campus. Tonight we'll see the opening of those 2 buildings, which are called the IDM extension buildings. The reason it's a double celebration or a double inauguration is that in the basement of one of those buildings, they're 2 copies of each other, 2 separate buildings. In the basement of one of the IDM extensions, there is a brand new purpose-built imaging microscopy laboratory, which will be opening as part of the Africa Microscopy Initiative, which is a pan-African initiative to make microscopy available to biomedical and life sciences researchers across the continent, and at the same time to enhance and increase the awareness of imaging as a fundamental tool in modern life sciences research. And actually, Caron is the qualified microscopist amongst between the 2 of us. So Caron, I think, is much better positioned to speak about the lab and what it contains, because it's a really phenomenal set of equipment that's now sitting downstairs waiting for users.
Yeah, I had a sneak preview, and it's pretty impressive. Of course, tonight we will see the whole thing, and it will be festive. Do you want to say a few words about?
I mean, mainly we're very excited and very proud of the space. It will be the first of its kind in Africa in terms of the scope of the facilities and the extent of the facilities and technology available on the continent, all in one space. So we've got very high specified wide field microscopes, confocal microscope, super resolution microscopes, side scanners, and screening microscopes, all equipped for live cell imaging at a BSL2 specification, so that African researchers can bring their samples relevant to the challenges that we face on this continent and
Sure.
drive their research.
Yeah, this is impressive. How is it? Both of you have a long-standing background in imaging and also biological and health sciences. Do you want to tell a little bit about your background?
I think Caron can go first, because it's definitely true in her case. In my case, less so. I'm more of a microbiologist than an imaging scientist. However, part of the work that I do has pushed me more and more into an imaging direction. But I think Caron, has got the real expertise.
I mean, I'm a biochemist by training, but fell in love with microscopy very quickly during my graduate studies and have decided to focus my career on microscopy. So I now work as an imaging scientist here at UCT.
Right. So biochemistry and of course imaging, they go nicely together, and couldn't be a better combination. How is it when you think about the history, your history and the history of the place? How has this developed? You told a little bit about that background, but how has this come together in such a nice way?
I think it's a lot of nice coincidences, but also a greater awareness I guess globally, or awareness from our perspective, that global science is being driven increasingly by imaging. I mean, there are many tools available to a modern research scientist, but I think importantly in our setting, historically and probably to a certain extent even currently, the perception is, or was, and probably still is, that imaging is a nice add-on on a project. If it's available and you've got some kind of imaging modality available and you can access it, that's great. But it's probably not going to be critical for your research.
Yeah.
And of course that's completely not the case and not scientific.
Sure.
So as a molecular biologist and a microbiologist, I realized that after 15 years of working on Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which causes tuberculosis, that the best we were ever doing was looking at colonies forming on plates, never looking at individual organisms to understand. I mean, I didn't even know what our enemy, if you will, looked like. And so I started getting increasingly frustrated by the fact that all of the tools that we were using at the time relied on inference. How many colonies form on a plate? If you extract the DNA, does it or doesn't it contain mutations, etc. We were never really looking at the living system in detail. And I think this speaks to a lot of the research that goes on here and throughout the continent, that people make do with the tools that they have, and that's as far as the science will extend. Whereas with an initiative such as this, we're hoping that it will completely change the way research questions are approached, so that imaging itself can actually be the driver of the research and the hypothesis generator, not the sort of cherry on the top, if you will, at the very end of a project.
Yeah. And now you can, of course, combine single-cell omics and single-cell technologies with imaging and so forth. So
Yes,
lots of possibility.
Yeah, there's often been a perception that the microscopy, as Digby says, it's an add-on. It's just a nice picture to help your paper get accepted. And there's often been a perception amongst African researchers that microscopy is too expensive, too complicated, too challenging, not necessary, and hard to access. And because of that, we're missing out. We've got entire fields of research that are missing out on the benefits that microscopy can bring, because exactly as you say, it is such a complementary technology to everything else that has already been implemented in Africa.
Sure.
So the combinations of these technologies will definitely be able to help us advance African research and bring it on par with the rest of the world.
Interestingly, in many surveys you can see that up to 90% of the researchers, they think that imaging is still necessary, in Europe at least. And I guess that will be changing around the world also, so that people really see that it is key to have imaging. So now you have the Africa Microscopy Initiative, and that will be kicked off today. But how did it start in the beginning? That was lots of happy coincidences, I guess.
I think the nucleus of the idea for it came from a workshop that was run here in January of 2020, and that was really the brainchild of my colleague Michael Reicke, as well as Teng-Yong Chu, working with Digby to run a workshop called Imaging Africa, based here, with the focus of it being open entirely and only to researchers from the rest of Africa, making it as accessible as possible by covering expenses. And we were completely overwhelmed by the response in terms of the number of applications that we had for a very small workshop. That definitely gave the clear signal that there is a need and an interest and a desire for microscopy training and access to microscopy across the continent. And the feedback that we got from students to that workshop was that they have a lot of difficulty accessing the infrastructure where they are. Without training and experience in microscopy, it's difficult for them to justify, to prove that they have capacity to implement a microscope if they do get the funding for it. So all of this fed into the idea of starting up a facility here in Cape Town that anyone in Africa can come and access to gain that first proof of principle, prove that they have capacity, get the training, that sort of thing. I think that's sort of where it all stemmed from.
And then I'm hearing that already now it's kind of an enabling key point in Africa. So in a way also not only providing services for imaging, but it's taking together the African community also otherwise in terms of science.
It's come together very nicely that also in the early days of COVID, also stemming out of this workshop, we heard that the African researchers were feeling very isolated in their efforts to implement imaging. So we started what's called the African Bioimaging Consortium, with the focus of actually just uniting the community, encouraging them to share resources, share information, share difficulties, and come together as a united community that can advocate together for what is needed for their research, as well as to share information and have them access the sort of opportunities that are available to them.
Speaking about the opportunities, what kind of opportunities do you foresee in the future in terms of, I mean, the sky is the limit in a way, so.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think, in coming back to one of your earlier questions, and it relates to this, there are a lot of challenges which we are tackling scientifically: infectious disease, chronic diseases, agricultural and livestock diseases, for example, which require access to technology locally, because it's often very difficult, if not impossible, to ship materials to other sites for it to be analyzed or imaged. Of course, it also in some cases where material can be shipped, there's a loss of viability, or because you have to preserve the samples in a specific way. So
There's also a loss of agency and ownership of the project, which is important to acknowledge. And if we give access to for people to not have to send their samples, but to actually work with them themselves, and that increases their research capabilities as well.
And then coming back and then on the opportunity side, so there's the ability to do things which otherwise potentially have never been done, just because it's been the barriers have been too great. But the other opportunity is there's no substitute for having really good analytical equipment available. It's there's the chance observation, or in some cases the error in an experiment, which actually opens up a new field of thinking or scientific research. And as Caron says, if you are relying on others to process your samples, those moments are never going to happen.
You mentioned the application areas a little bit, so and infectious diseases, parasites, and so forth. Do you see any specific areas that are kind of opening up now, thanks to this?
Sorry, we've equipped the lab to ensure that it can handle up to biosafety level 2 samples. At infectious diseases, we foresee as being a strong area that researchers will be bringing in samples for, and sort of what we call the big 3 is the HIV, TB, and Plasmodium that causes malaria. But we've already had expressions of interest from researchers working in other areas of parasitology, worm biology, neurobiology, neurosciences, as well as researchers interested in actually just learning more about the technology itself, about the optics. So beyond research applications and the way that this will enable research, what we hope to see is, in addition, along with education programs that we'll be running out of this lab, is that this actually builds up an entire research ecosystem and can ideally lead into development of industry in this area, locally and on the continent.
Right. If we think about the challenges for AMI and also for your institute otherwise, what do you see any kind of daunting challenges ahead of you?
So I think our initial challenge is, and something we've got to solve, is to get the message out and to convince people, to make it clear to people that actually this is a free resource. For example, to use the imaging center, that will be on an application basis if the science is approved. from that point on, everything will be done to ensure that the investigator and their samples get here to Cape Town and get worked on with appropriate assistance and utilization of the best microscopes that are available to answer that question. So the first thing is messaging. We have to solve our messaging, and of course, Africa is an enormous continent. We're located here in one place on that continent, so we have to broadcast widely and loudly. But I think through communities such as Caron has set up, through ABIC and other communities, other bioimaging organizations can amplify this message too and convince people that there's now this opportunity. So that's the first thing. The second one, I think, is to really demonstrate success. And I don't think that it's a challenge, but not in a negative way. It's the challenge that really is driving us is we need quickly to start getting projects through the imaging center, but then also recruiting people into the other components of AMI. So AMI is made up of more than just the imaging center. There's the program for equipment exchange and redistribution, where we'll be looking to get microscopes into facilities throughout the continent associated with research scientists who are interested or technically proficient in microscopy. There's the Partners in Teaching program, which is going to pair an African researcher with someone based in North America or Europe in order to develop workshops around bioimaging. And there will be Imaging Africa itself will continue to operate as a workshop, an annual workshop around image analysis and some principles of optics. And then I think the other challenge, but also the opportunity, is we really need to develop good courses which are available to researchers all the way from entry level through to the most advanced. And again, I think with partners who have developed far more than we have at this point, we can accelerate that aspect too. We don't need to learn new things. We can adapt and implement what's already been done.
But the amazing thing is that you have already identified the same major challenge that we have identified in Euro-BioImaging, also in Janelia campus, the outreach. So you're spreading the gospel. It's not easy because it's too good to be true.
No.
It's all available, it's free,
Yeah.
it's excellent, it's the best machines you can get.
I think what will be key is what Digby's already mentioned, is early success stories.
Yeah.
Because success breeds success. And if we have researchers who come to use the facilities here, they see the impact it's had on their research, they automatically will become ambassadors for what is here. They can tell their colleagues, they can present the work on various different forums, and that will generate interest as well.
Sorry, John, the one thing I wanted to add there is because when we first got access to the Advanced Imaging Center at Janelia, one of our concerns was, what if our experiment fails and we've got 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever to get it? What if we can't get it right? Is that our one shot? And I think that's the other thing which we've got to overcome, which is that people can access the center more than once in order to develop a research project. And if we can't here take a project as far as it needs to go, that then they can be a transition into other advanced centers globally. Importantly, what Caron's also highlighted is that individuals who are researchers who get to do some work here, they need to be going back into supportive and supported environments where they can continue the kind of work. It may not be that the precise instrumentation exists in their host laboratory just yet, but our challenge is going to be ensuring that if there's a microscope that they've worked on here that has opened up their project and their field of research, we need to get that equivalent microscope back into their lab.
Yeah, that sounds more than reasonable. And when it comes to this continuum from your environment to, let's say, a global environment, do you see a reason why African scientists, they don't use so much the infrastructures that are available in Euro-BioImaging, Janelia, and so forth? I guess you have been using Janelia
Yeah, and actually it comes back to your earlier question about what was the motivation for this center. When we used Geneva, we were the first, and I think are still the only research group from the continent to have access to that center. Part of it was that we didn't know it was available, and then, as you said, when I found out it was available, I thought, this is too good to be true. They're never going to accept us. There's much better competitive projects from North America, Europe, elsewhere that are going to be accepted. So I think that perception has to be overcome. And as I said, to reiterate, I think one of the other things that is a barrier to utilization is the sense that if I use this, and even if it works, if I get the results that I want, I get the information that I want, when I return to my host laboratory, if I don't have access to that kind of equipment, or there's just the lack of an infrastructure around me that can support this kind of research, should I even do it in the first place? Maybe I should concentrate my efforts on the technologies and the techniques which are available here rather than looking for others. And I think that applies not just to imaging. I mean, that applies to other things. Wherever there's core facilities, should I even use them in the first place?
We're, of course, in Euro-BioImaging, we're eager to help. One thing which I had identified from this discussion that where we could collaborate intimately is just the outreach. Telling the story, telling the success stories from your environment, which are kind of different from those that we have in Europe and the other way around. So do you see any other ways that Euro-BioImaging could, and the Euro-BioImaging nodes could help you?
Yes, actually. We have, in addition to the launch that we're having today, we've just come out of the very first 3-day in-person African Bioimaging Consortium meeting. And we had a session discussing community networks worldwide. And we very quickly realized that our community is very hungry to be connected with communities across the world, and for mentorship. Not necessarily hands-on training, but just mentorship in their journey through taking on imaging, becoming imaging scientists, setting up core facilities. And that growth of that community will also feed into increased access and implementation of the initiatives that we're running through AMI. So I think there's a very strong role for other global networks to support what we're doing.
Absolutely, and Euro-BioImaging is very willing to help in this respect. But I think this success stories in science in general, because science should be the success stories we have in science, they should be told.
Definitely.
And they are nice stories, but they should everybody should be aware of them.
Maybe one thing to add. I think for us the ultimate success, and this is part of the longer term plan, is AMI is this multifaceted program. Almost all of the components, other than the imaging center, can operate virtually in any environment, and that's really what we're going to be pushing to accomplish. What we really want to see is within the next few years that there's an imaging center here, but there's another imaging center opening up elsewhere on the continent, and perhaps a second and a third and a fourth, that actually this is just the first imaging center of its kind, but it should definitely not be the only one.
Absolutely,
and
not for an entire continent.
Not for an entire, and so I think another key role that Euro-BioImaging could to play is once we start developing those success stories, which would be both research outcomes, but also the training and all the other components, that we need to make the voice louder to say, how is it that there's only one center like this on the continent? There should be more than one of these.
That sounds like a nice development.
Yeah, it would be very exciting.
Another success story would be seeing researchers who've used the facilities made available here, and then their project growing to such an extent that this becomes a springboard to them accessing the sort of facilities that are available through Euro-BioImaging. That would be a very clear mark of success.
That sounds like a plan. Anything you would like to add at this stage?
I think we've covered everything.
I think...
Except for thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
For your interest and enthusiasm around.
My and our pleasure.
everything.
And maybe we should say that there's an open invitation to anyone who wants to visit at any time.
Okay.
Please,
Definitely.
through your community, but also colleagues, collaborators, come and visit. In addition to the core facilities, we have other research going on in this environment and throughout the country and continent that I think people are just not aware of. And it's a friendly place.
We have seen it already. It's a very friendly place. I know that the official opening is tonight, but maybe if you could show us around a little bit, we could have a walk. If that's
Absolutely,
okay.
that would be our pleasure.
Okay, let's have a walk.